Hi, seventh graders. So this is going to be the work for April 15th. That'll be Wednesday. Okay, in order to kind of get us started here, we covered 8.1 in class before we had gotten sent home for the virus. So I'm going to quickly kind of review this section in the book with you to make sure that you're ready to go when we get to the end of chapter 8. Chapter 8, we're actually going to move to or through relatively fast. Okay, so I'm assuming that since I gave out most of chapter eight's work before spring break, that most of you already have it done. If not, you can find that stuff on the Google Classroom in that PDF that I shared with you, and it would have been in mid-March. Okay, but it should be the third last thing before this. So if you don't have those sheets filled out, do so, because starting tomorrow with 8.2 and then 8.3, I will be going over those for you to compare your answers on to make sure that we're on the same page before we do the Chapter 8 assessment. Okay. That being said, today's we'll move rather quickly through because, like I said, we already took the quiz on this in class. We've covered all of it, so I'm gonna move through this rather quickly for you today. Okay, so to kind of restart where we were, Chapter 8 focused on cultures of the United States and Canada. So for those of you who don't remember what a culture is going to be the way people go through their lives. Okay, so that's a combination of the language you speak, the foods you eat, possibly your religion if you practice one, the clothes you wear, the music you listen to, the kind of home you live in, okay, the region you live in. All of these pertain to your culture. Okay, and those are just a few examples. There are far, far more that you can get into. Okay, but all of those things combine to make up someone's culture. And in Chapter 8, we're going to talk about the people of Canada and the United States cultures. Okay, so the first thing we need to talk about is the great variety of cultures that exist in both of those countries. Starting with both of them, okay, obviously there is Native American culture, and you can see that on page 215 in your textbook, okay? That's what I'm using as my guide to kind of give you guys a review. That way we all have the same material. Okay, so on 215, it's going to start out by talking about the Native American cultures and how they use the land and other things around them in order to create their culture. Okay, they would have also have been those first people in both North America, or in North America, which includes the United States and Canada. Okay, so obviously their culture looms very, very large, which brings us to our first vocabulary word that we had talked about in class for this section, cultural exchange. Okay, which means the process by which different cultures share ideas and ways of doing things. Okay, so what you can do right now is pause this video and give me, or at least think of, an example of cultural exchange. Okay. All right, now that you're back, the example of cultural exchange that comes to my mind first, and the one that we mentioned in class a lot, is, and of course, it's the way of sharing ideas and ways of doing things. We talked about the Native Americans teaching the French people how to trap, okay, or teaching how to farm different ways, okay? Like, for example, corn wasn't found in Europe, so the Europeans, when they arrived in North America, did not know how to farm that, nor were they as effective at trapping animals as the Native Americans. So that would be an example of cultural exchange in a way of sharing ideas or doing things, okay? Moving on from cultural exchange, we arrive at immigrant contributions. Immigrant contributions, obviously contribution means to give something. Okay, if you were to contribute something to a conversation, it means you are giving something to that conversation. Okay, so immigrant contributions is going to be the ways that immigrants moving to both the United States and Canada provide something to culture. Now, that would be an easy thing to think of. Again, if you want to take a second here, think of a way that immigrants can provide something to the culture that they're moving to. Go ahead. All right. My example that I can think of first off is language, right? Of course, when Europeans first arrived in the United States and Canada, they brought their language with them, also going to bring foods, things like that, that are essential to someone's way of life. Okay, so immigrant contributions can include those things. Which brings us to our second vocabulary word, an ethnic group. And an ethnic group is a group of people who share a common language, history, and culture. Okay, and we've talked about ethnic group in class as well. One of the large ethnic groups in Wisconsin is what? Okay, that's going to be that German heritage in Wisconsin, right? Now, there are, of course, many, many, many different ethnic groups in not only Wisconsin and the United States, but we have talked about that one in specific because a lot of us are able to relate to that one, especially in the area that we live in. Okay, so that's going to be people who share language, history, and culture. Of course, most, not all, of course, but most people in the United States do speak at least some English. So that could be a language that we all share. At one time, a lot of people in the Wisconsin region spoke a lot of German language. Okay, so both sharing languages that way. History, what it means by sharing a history is a way that your lives have played out. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're sharing history like I am with you right now. Okay, but it means that you share similar events throughout your life. Okay, you shared similar events. And then finally, culture would be the way that you dress, eat. If you practice a religion, that would be part of it. All of those types of things combined create an ethnic group. All right, which brings us to cultural patterns today. Fitting in. Okay, of course, when immigrants move to a new place, you don't necessarily want to stand out a lot, right? You kind of want to fit into where you're going. And I related this in class to that example of to think if you were to move to a new school as a student, right? You want to try and blend in to those new or that new student body so that you're not the only one doing those weird things, right? So it's kind of the same way when you're an immigrant. You kind of want to learn what's going on so that way you can fit into that cultural, that ethnic group, that way of life. Okay. Now, of course, along with fitting in, that also brings us to the part of maintaining traditions. Now, of course, you do want to fit in so you're more be able to function better in that lifestyle, that place you move to, but you also want to maintain some of the things. So, for example, if you like to eat particular foods, you probably would still eat some of those foods. Most places, especially the United States and Canada, dress very similarly. So if you were to move to either one of those places, you would not have to change or wouldn't even be tempted to change the style of clothes that you wear, whether or unless you move to somewhere very, very cold. Okay. But you want to maintain some traditions, especially, or immigrants want to maintain some traditions, whether it be language. Some people, if they choose to move to a new region, still retain that first language that they spoke because how cool is it to know two languages, right? Not only that, but it gives you something to hang on to where you're from, right? You don't want to completely forget about that place you used to call home. So that's why people want to maintain those traditions along with trying to fit into that new place they moved to. Okay. Finally, between the United States and Canada, we have those cultural ties. Okay. The United States and Canada are not all that different, especially in the sense that we at both one time were controlled by Britain. Okay. Canada would be much more recently than the United States. But due to that, we're very similar in the fact that everywhere in Canada, besides Quebec, is going to speak a majority of English, unless you get into the northern parts of Canada. There's a lot of native languages. In the United States, the majority of language spoken is again English, although there are many others, including Spanish and so on, that also are spoken here. The way we dress, very, very similar. Okay, foods that are eaten are very similar. The music that is listened to is very similar. Okay, movies, TV shows, all very, very similar to lives in both the United States and Canada. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. It's not a totally different world once you cross the Canadian border. In fact, it's very, very similar. Which brings us along with the Canadian border, we can talk about that most of the people in Canada are going to live where? Within about 200 miles of the Canadian border. And why would that be? Because remember, the farther north you go in Canada, okay, you're going to run into the Canadian Shield. The weather is going to start getting very cold. Okay, it becomes more difficult to live. So therefore, most of the population of Canada is going to live in southern Canada, and more specifically, a lot of them are going to live in, Quebec and Ontario. Okay, although the prairie provinces also have quite a few people, right? That's Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, because that is where a majority of Canada's farming is done. Once you get into the northern part, the three territories, not a lot of people up there. Because it's so cold and you run into those issues. So most of the people in Canada, again, are going to live within 200 miles of the United States-Canada border. Okay. Finally, economic ties. The United States and Canada, as we talked about in class, are very, very large trade partners. Okay. In fact, more things are traded between the United States and Canada than the United States and any other country. So that's something to keep track of. They are the world's biggest trade partners. Okay. Along with that, lots of shipping back and forth. Okay, so it's giving people jobs, lots of products being bought from both places, because we have very similar ways of making things and similar resources. Okay, so that pretty much takes us through 8.1. Again, it's a pretty fast review, about 10 minutes I see now. If you have questions about anything that I've talked about, skim over the section, shoot me an email, request a time to talk, anything you need to do, I am here to help you. Okay, so this will be, again, for April 15th. This is your work for today. What I need you to do for April 16th, which will be tomorrow, please skim over 8.2 because you should have already read it. If you have not read it, please do that. And also do the worksheets if you have not done that, because tomorrow's 8.2 review, I will be going over those worksheets as well as kind of going over what I did today. Okay, so again, we're moving through chapter 8 relatively quickly because I have confidence and I think all of you are responsible enough to have done that work that I was able to give you before spring break. Again, if you need help on anything, please do not hesitate to contact me. I am here to help you. I usually respond to emails very quickly. I have it on my phone and my computer, so I am here to help you. Have a good day. Stay healthy.